Chapter 3. The Locked Drawer. Ethan woke with a start, his heart hammering against his ribs. Pale winter sunlight filtered through dusty curtains, casting the unfamiliar bedroom in a jaundiced glow. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was. Then it all rushed back. The train ride, Harold's cryptic warnings, Maslow's decaying mansion with its impossibly vast library. And that sound, the phantom typing that had invaded his dreams, keys clacking like skeletal fingers on ancient ivory. He reached for his phone. 7:42 a.m. No signal. Still. The house creaked around him, a deep settling sound like an old man's joints protesting the morning. But beneath that familiar noise lurked something else, a rhythm just slightly too deliberate to be random. "Get it together, Cole," he muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "You're becoming the protagonist in one of those hackneyed haunted house stories you used to mock." The floorboards were ice against his bare feet, the cold seeping into his bones in a way his Brooklyn apartment's chill never quite managed. After a quick shower in the antiquated bathroom, the pipes groaning and spitting rusty water for a full minute before running clear, Ethan dressed and made his way downstairs. The house felt different in daylight. No less imposing, but the shadows had retreated to corners and beneath furniture. What had seemed menacing the night before now merely looked sad and neglected, like an aging literary reputation. In the kitchen, he made strong coffee using a battered percolator he found in a cabinet. The familiar ritual steadied him, the rich aroma cutting through the pervasive smell of dust and decay that hung in the air. And something else, a faint metallic tang he couldn't quite place. As he waited for the coffee to brew, he reviewed his mental checklist for the day. Start properly cataloging the library, room by room, shelf by shelf. The family wanted everything inventoried: books, manuscripts, personal papers. 2 weeks suddenly seemed like an impossibly short time, a deadline more crushing than any his editor had ever imposed. Coffee in hand, Ethan returned to the library. Daylight streamed through the tall windows, dust motes dancing in the pale beams like suspended constellations. The room was cavernous, somehow both grand and claustrophobic with its towering shelves. He felt eyes upon him, though he knew he was alone, perhaps just the countless authors watching from their book spines, their collected wisdom and madness bound in leather and cloth. He set his mug on the mahogany desk and booted up his laptop. "Let's start with the desk," he said aloud, his voice swallowed by the vastness of the room. Heart of darkness for any writer worth his salt. The desk had 9 drawers, 4 on each side and a narrow center drawer. Most contained what he expected: old correspondence, bills, fountain pens dried to uselessness. The center drawer held a half-empty pack of cigarettes, yellowed with age, and a book of matches from a hotel in Manhattan. Mundane artifacts of a life cut short, the kind of details he'd have dismissed as heavy-handed in a workshop story. But it was the bottom right drawer that drew his attention. Unlike the others, it wouldn't budge. Ethan ran his fingers along the seam, feeling for a keyhole. There it was, a tiny, almost invisible slit. He pulled out the ring of keys Harold had given him and sorted through them until he found a small brass key that might fit. It didn't. Frowning, Ethan sat back in the leather chair, which exhaled dust as it accepted his weight, the particles catching in his throat. Why lock one drawer and leave the others open? What could Maslow have been hiding? The question carried a weight that pressed against his chest, a pressure that had nothing to do with the musty air. He tried several more keys from the ring without success. Frustrated, he began searching the desk more thoroughly, running his hands beneath the drawers and along the underside of the writing surface. The wood felt unnaturally cold beneath his fingertips, like touching stone rather than timber. His fingers found a small compartment hidden on the underside of the desk, a finger-sized depression concealing a tiny drawer. Inside was a single key, smaller than any on the ring. "Bingo," he murmured, a chill running up his arm as he extracted it, as if the metal itself carried some frozen energy. The key slid into the locked drawer's keyhole perfectly. Ethan turned it, feeling the tumblers click into place with a sound like bones breaking. The drawer opened with surprising smoothness, as if it had been recently oiled despite the decades of neglect everywhere else. Inside was a single item, a manuscript bound in weathered dark leather, its spine unmarked. Ethan lifted it carefully. The leather felt warm beneath his fingers, almost alive, pulsing with a subtle rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat. He placed it on the desk and stared at it for a long moment, an inexplicable reluctance keeping him from opening it, like a swimmer hesitating at the edge of dark waters. When he finally did, the cover fell open to reveal a blank title page. No author, no title, just creamy vellum that had somehow resisted yellowing with age. He turned to the first page and found himself looking at precise, elegant handwriting. Some stories write themselves. The best ones consume their readers, word by bloody word. Ethan felt a strange chill as he read the line, as if a cold finger had traced his spine from nape to tailbone. The handwriting was confident, deliberate, nothing like the frantic scrawl he'd seen in the journal the night before. This was the work of a man in control of his craft. The ink had a peculiar quality to it, not quite black, but a deep crimson that only revealed itself when the light struck at certain angles. He turned the page, and the novel began. It opened with the scene of a writer, a failed, bitter man in his late 30s living in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, drowning in rejection letters and alcohol. Ethan's breath caught. The character, named Morgan Chase, could have been his twin. The scene described the exact layout of Ethan's own apartment, down to the stacks of books on the floor and the framed review beside the bathroom door. Even the crack in his bathroom sink, the one shaped vaguely like Florida, appeared in the text. "What the fuck?" Ethan whispered, his heart suddenly racing, sweat beading at his hairline despite the chill in the room. It was impossible. Maslow had died in 1976. There was no way he could have known about Ethan's life, his apartment, his failures, yet the prose depicted it all with uncomfortable accuracy, as if Maslow had been watching him through some temporal window. The novel continued with Morgan Chase taking a job cataloging the library of a dead writer named Martin Hale. The eerie parallels made Ethan's skin crawl, but more disturbing was the quality of the writing. It was exquisite, hypnotic. The prose had a rhythm that pulled him along, each sentence hooking into the next like links in a chain. He found himself turning pages without conscious decision, utterly engrossed despite his unease. Twice he tried to pull away, once when his fingers began to cramp, and again when he thought he heard a noise from elsewhere in the house. Each time, his attention snapped back to the manuscript with increased intensity, as if the words themselves exerted a gravitational pull. Hours slipped by. The coffee beside him grew cold, untouched. The light through the windows shifted, shadows lengthening across the floor like reaching fingers. Ethan read on, helpless to stop. The story described how Morgan Chase discovered a manuscript that paralleled his own life, how he became obsessed with it. Then the narrative took a darker turn. It described Morgan's decision to steal the manuscript, to pass it off as his own work. The character's justification was portrayed with such psychological insight that Ethan found himself nodding along. Of course, Morgan would take it. Who wouldn't? The original author was dead. The work would otherwise be lost forever. Wasn't bringing great art into the world the right thing to do, no matter the means? Hadn't James Joyce's work been saved through literary theft? Hadn't countless lost manuscripts been resurrected through questionable means? Ethan finally tore himself away from the manuscript when his stomach growled painfully. He glanced at his watch, shocked to discover it was nearly 4 p.m. He'd been reading for over 7 hours without moving, without drinking, barely breathing. "Jesus," he muttered, massaging his stiff neck. His mouth tasted of copper and salt, as if he'd been biting his tongue. He ran his finger along his lower lip, and it came away with a dark smudge. Not quite blood, not quite ink. He stood, his legs unsteady beneath him. The manuscript lay open on the desk, innocent yet somehow threatening in the afternoon light. Ethan felt a powerful urge to return it to the drawer, to lock it away and forget he'd found it. The pages seemed to rustle without any breeze, a soft whisper of paper against paper, like secrets being exchanged. Instead, he placed a scrap of paper to mark his place and went to the kitchen. As he made a sandwich from the supplies in the refrigerator, his mind raced. The parallels were too precise to be coincidence. Either this was some elaborate prank, Clara setting him up somehow, or what? The alternative was impossible. That somehow, decades ago, Victor Maslow had written a story that predicted Ethan's life in uncanny detail. that the manuscript was something more than paper and ink, that it was alive somehow, watching, waiting. "Get a grip," he muttered, the bread knife pausing over the loaf. "Next, you'll be checking the basement for demonic rituals." But his literary mind couldn't help cataloging the tropes he was living through: the isolated house, the mysterious manuscript, the struggling writer tempted by forbidden knowledge. He was walking through the pages of an M.R. James story, or stepping into a Lovecraftian nightmare of forbidden texts. Sandwich in hand, Ethan returned to the library. The manuscript waited for him, pages slightly ruffled as if stirred by a breath. He approached it warily, half expecting to find the text had changed, that new words had appeared in his absence. But it remained as he'd left it, open to the page where Morgan Chase begins typing out the stolen manuscript on his laptop, making subtle edits to disguise the theft. Ethan sat down and resumed reading. The story followed Morgan as he submitted the manuscript to publishers. The bidding war that ensued, the overnight success, the fame Morgan had always craved, finally his. And then, the deaths that followed. The first was a blogger who gave the book a glowing review, found impaled on a wrought iron fence outside her apartment building, her body suspended like a grotesque gallery installation, a critic permanently affixed to her final judgment. Ethan thought fleetingly of Sasha Lynn, the influential horror blogger whose endorsement every writer craved. Then a rival author who'd publicly mocked Morgan, discovered with his lungs filled with black ink that leaked from his eyes and mouth during a public reading. Not unlike Daniel Price, the literary darling whose meteoric rise had coincided with Ethan's fall. As Ethan read, the descriptions became more vivid, more disturbing. He could almost taste the metallic scent of blood, feel the sticky warmth of it on his hands. The ink on the page seemed to glisten wetly in the fading light, as if freshly applied. He slammed the manuscript shut, breathing hard. A droplet of something dark fell onto the leather cover. From his nose, he realized, wiping at a sudden nosebleed with the back of his hand. The library had grown dark around him, the only light now coming from his laptop screen. Ethan hadn't noticed the sun setting. He switched on the desk lamp, its warm glow doing little to dispel the encroaching shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The temperature in the room had dropped precipitously, his breath now fogging before him. His mind worked feverishly. The manuscript was brilliant, revolutionary even. The kind of novel that would cement a literary legacy. And it was just sitting here, forgotten in a locked drawer, its genius trapped between untouched pages. Was he its savior or its next victim? Both, perhaps. No one would ever know. The manuscript was handwritten, no digital copies, no way to prove provenance. Maslow had no children, and the distant relations handling his estate clearly had no idea what treasures the library contained. He'd be doing the literary world a favor, rescuing this masterpiece from obscurity. The justifications rang hollow even as they formed, but the temptation remained irresistible. This was his chance, his lifeline, his salvation. Before he could talk himself out of it, Ethan opened his laptop and created a new document. He turned back to the first page of the manuscript and began to type. Some stories write themselves. The best ones consume their readers, word by bloody word. The words flowed from his fingers, a strange electric thrill running through him as Maslow's prose manifested on his screen. It felt wrong, yes, but also intoxicating. These weren't his words, but they could be. No one alive would know the difference. The act of transcription felt almost like collaboration, as if Maslow himself were guiding his fingers across the keys. Ethan typed for hours, pausing only when his wrists began to ache with a pain that went deeper than mere physical strain. His fingers felt different somehow, colder, stiffer, as if the bones had elongated slightly. When he flexed them, the skin around his knuckles seemed tighter, the veins more prominent. An optical illusion from typing too long, nothing more. He had transcribed nearly 50 pages when the library door suddenly swung shut with a thunderous bang. He jerked upright, heart pounding. "Hello?" he called. "Harold?" No answer came, just the settling of the old house, the creak of wood contracting in the night air. A draft, nothing more. But his nerve had broken. He saved the document, then carefully returned the manuscript to its drawer and locked it. The key felt unnaturally hot against his palm, as if it had absorbed heat from some invisible fire. As Ethan left the library, laptop tucked under his arm, he paused at the threshold. Was that a soft sigh he heard from behind him? The scrape of a page turning? He glanced back, but saw only shadows and still bookshelves. His overtired mind playing tricks, surely. He didn't notice that he'd left the drawer key on the desk. Nor did he see it, or did he, slowly slide across the polished wood, as if pulled by invisible fingers, until it dropped with a soft plink back into the hidden compartment beneath the desk. A movement glimpsed from the corner of his eye, dismissed as imagination. But as he closed the door behind him, the sound was unmistakable, the rhythmic clatter of typewriter keys, striking paper with deliberate purpose. Ethan froze, hand on the doorknob. Should he look? Verify what he'd heard? He chose retreat instead, hurrying toward the stairs, the sound of phantom typing following him down the corridor like an accusation. In the darkness of the library, something sighed. The typing continued, keys clacking with measured determination long into the night. In his bedroom, as Ethan drifted into uneasy sleep, he imagined he could still hear it, the tap, tap, tap of keys striking paper. The sound of tomorrow's work, the sound of his future, the sound of Chapter 4 being written. The plagiarist's spark had been ignited.